afternoon, everybody. John from Team Doom Spiral here at the Doom Den, as we like to call it, for our very first live action video. Today we're going to be talking about competitive play, and one of the staples of it right now is player place terrain. Now this is something that was released about mid last year, starting from FLG and the ITC circuit, where you and your opponent basically take turns placing terrain, and how it's kind of shifted the way people play, shifted the meta. And how you play with an army meta or otherwise. We wanted to kind of look it over. One of the main things that we're going to be using as a tool here for this is going to be this FLG mat. It's the standard Strike Force size mat, 44 by 60. We're going to be looking at two missions. The first one is Vital Intelligence, and the second one is going to be Death and Zeal. That'll give you an idea of how exactly it plays out, how it works, and kind of the tactics that we recommend to make it easier for you when you're going out to your local RTT, GT, or even up to like a super major or major level. Kind of make it a little easier to navigate. We're also using as a teaching tool our awesome Doom Spiral objective markers. They are really nifty, and for this invaluable. So we'll get to working on that right now and kind of walk you through it. So a few of the major things with the terrain and the way it's set up is in the player packet for each ITC event, the large actual ITC sponsored events. It includes photos of the terrain and what classification it's going to be. Typically, these terrain pieces and the terrain sets are symmetrical, or about as symmetrical as you can get. There's about 4 or 5 pieces on each side, 4 for a lighter size board, and up to 6 for a heavier size board, but the median is going to be about 5. It depends. The sets are also correlated with the sets that they sell on their website. But obviously not every local game store or store that's going to have events is going to have that, but they'll try to make it about as equal as you can imagine. One of the main colloquial terms for one of the larger pieces is ruins. Everyone knows them as ruins, but they're called area terrain in the packet. They have the obscuring keyword, breachable, light cover, and in some cases, dense cover, depending on the event. I know that when we were at Hammer of Wrath, not too long ago, about last year, everything was dense. Now, playing 8th edition Tyranids with Hive Guard was a tough prospect, but that's the way it is. Now, one of the main things that is interesting is that a lot of people used to want to shoot for the attacker. So when you're doing that first roll off to determine who places first unit, now not only do you place first unit, you also place first piece of terrain. Now on the board itself you have up to the half line if you're doing standard deployment. Dawn of War will be that way, and then if we're doing diagonal deployment, it's going to be up through the line. So Vital Intelligence, those sorts of missions, you're going to be diagonal. You cannot cross the center line. And on the objective markers, most good objective markers will have a 40mm circle around the center dot, and that's an exclusionary zone. You can place terrain on the mat itself, but you cannot place it past that line. Imagine that 40mm circle as the actual metal objective marker that you could get from Games Workshop or anything, but you cannot place terrain directly on that. The mats are nifty because you can see exactly where everything is going to be, and yes, you can place terrain on there. Just be aware of where you're placing your terrain and your units if you want to have that objective. So to make this easier to visualize, I went ahead and pulled out some terrain pieces from my own collection. These are from the Gothic set, Gothic Cathedral set of FLG's terrain. Each one of these in the player packet would be considered area terrain. These ones would be obstacles, crates as well, people call them. So each set would get, on the general table, you get 5 pieces each, and there would also be an area piece that has no terrain, no other features, which would basically be your forest or crater, the dense cover. So each one of these pieces has different keywords. They enumerate them in the player packet, 1 through 10. 1 through 11, actually, the 11th being inspiring, very rare to see. But those are going to be defensible, breachable, obscuring, light cover, scalable, difficult ground, dense cover, heavy cover, exposed position. Those are pretty much the ones that you're really going to see. These pieces, for instance, all these will be defensible, breachable, obscuring, light cover, and scalable. These are obstacles, so they have exposed position, light cover, and scalable. And the flat terrain has the majority of the area terrain, except they are not defensible, and you'll have difficult and dense cover as well. So that's positive. And then the larger pieces, which are not here, I haven't assembled them yet because they're just freaking gigantic, also confer heavy cover in addition to all the other area terrain benefits. One of the ways that people are differentiating pieces of area terrain, or what is considered obscuring, and it's also mentioned in the player packet, is if a piece is 5 inches and higher. However, some of the pieces that are flat are still obscuring and will still get the benefit of obscuring regardless of their height. Like I said, some of those flat pieces, for instance, I believe I mentioned it in passing, but at the Hammer Wrath our GT, they had several pieces, the entire board, indirect fire, dense terrain for the purposes of shooting through it with. The importance of the first dice roll now cannot be understated. Being able to not only pick the piece, the set of terrain that you get, and also place it first, means that you have a lot of opportunity not only to set yourself up with an advantageous position, but also to prevent your opponent from placing theirs in a way that would be optimal for them. So, like I said here, in our example, these two sets would be offered to the players, with one having a smaller crate than the other. So, upon that roll, if you get the higher dice for Defender, you may want to pick the large crate to hide, I guess if we're talking pre-nerfs, Hide Guard. This is just tall enough to have Hide Guard, just long enough to hide an entire squad. But if you were looking for something to help your fast moving stuff, or to prevent you from blocking your own monsters, you might want the smaller set. You have the ability to pick which side you want, and also pick which terrain set you want to use. So that's something really important in competitive events. Most of the times though, people will offer perfectly symmetrical terrain, which means that no one's getting the advantage except for the person who's placing their first piece, which again is a very important advantage. Continuing with the example that we're setting, I've gone ahead, I've happened to win the dice roll, and I picked this side for the corners, the mission being Death and Zeal. Now, you will have the entire half of the board that you are aligned with. So this side will be mine for the purposes of placing my terrain. Important tools for this is going to be your measuring tape. You want the area terrain, these larger pieces, to be 6 inches away from each other at a minimum. 4 inches away from the edge of the table, and 4 inches away from non-area terrain pieces. So that's very important, and it is entirely possible to, through misplacement, block yourself out, or block your pieces out. Now, there is some latitude to have errors and be able to shuffle stuff around. It happens to everyone. And these rules are also flexible in the sense that if someone, say your opponent is running a larger unit, you have to accommodate their base. So the 4-inch minimum for non-ruined pieces will suddenly become 6 inches if you're, say, playing with like Hyrule, or even larger if it's something like a Brass Scorpion. So that's all very important to keep in mind when you're placing your first piece. The way I place it as a Tyranid player, with new Tyranids and with old Tyranids, is I always like to have one large piece that is obscuring to prevent me from being shot at turn 1. Being able to blunt an Alpha Strike is very important with an army as vulnerable as Tyranids was, and not so much needed now, but still giving your opponent the opportunity to kill something with the lethality of the game as it is, it may not pay off. So say this is going to be my first piece, I would place it right here. Not only will this give me the opportunity to protect my objective marker here, but it would also give me the opportunity to have a platform to launch onto the middle objective and contest middle. Brawling for the center objective is very important, I feel, from the way I've played the game. So having this as a way to not only protect you from that Alpha Strike, but also serve as a light cover bump to get to the objective something that can't be overstated. Another thing that people will do and can do is they'll put a piece right here and kind of angle it so that as long as it doesn't cross over that center line, you can have it like this. And that means that when your opponent goes to place their piece, they cannot place within 6 inches of this guy. Therefore, they may have to place it in a weird spot, suboptimal for them. Forcing them to do that is important. It changes the way that they put their stuff and may cause them to make a mistake. Not that we want to capitalize on every mistake they make. The game is collaborative in nature, but that is one thing to keep in mind with this sort of placement. These bases are very large on these pieces, and generally the way it works is if you're touching that base, you are essentially using the terrain. You're benefiting from it. So you'll be getting the light cover, you'll be getting, say, the dense or whatever, or difficult with all that entails. So that's also something to keep in mind. And another thing is, once you're touching this, these windows, true line of sight will apply. So if you can see the model and it's in the terrain, you can shoot it. So we fast forward to here, all the terrain has been laid out, both sides relatively symmetrical just for the purposes of this exercise, but I wanted to show you something pretty important, using the terrain to your advantage once again. I placed this obstacle right here for the sole purpose of being able to serve as a roadblock for my opponent and also to protect my own movement when I eventually cross this quarter, go over there, take that piece of terrain, or that objective. I placed that piece right here so that I can protect my units once they get on this objective, because true line of sight will still apply and none of my infantry are going to be taller than that piece, so they will be hidden once they're shot at. Again, true line of sight is always a factor with these things, unless it's a model for 18 wounds, because at that point everything can see. As long as you have true line of sight, you can see it and you can shoot it. It's that simple. Another thing is, your opponent will be at a disadvantage because they have a smaller piece. Therefore, they won't be able to protect their full movement. And creating these lines, these clear fire lines here, will give your units the best opportunity to have clean shots towards your opponent's movement, make it difficult for them. The reason I put this piece here is so that if I place units behind it, I will be protected from line of sight, get through here. Might take a little bit longer to get there, but you will be protected, you won't be shot right off the board. It's a very important thing, especially with the hyper lethality of this. Well guys, that concludes our very first video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, just showing you kind of like what the future's holding for this channel. We're going to be doing a lot more of these tutorials for competitive play. Want people to kind of get more familiar with these sorts of concepts and putting these things into practice. We have our next RTT going on May 21st. We've got a lot of merch coming, and more shirts, objective markers, and some dice that we have available. Thanks again for 3D6 for holding our objectives, and hope to see you guys in the next content. I'm going to try to play a game next video. Thanks so much, have a good one, and remember, Team Doom Spiral, we doom so you don't have to.